So today I noticed that James White had mentioned on the Dividing Line program about my video that I did on Jehovah or Yahweh. And he also mentioned another guy called Christopher Myers, who is apparently a Presbyterian minister. And so I'm just going to be looking at this and looking at the claims that James White has made. And I'm making this video just because when I listen to the claims of James White, he tells so many falsehoods that sometimes it's hard to keep up with all these falsehoods. If I can do videos immediately after it, it just helps me because sometimes you have a backlog of things that you want to touch on. And sometimes people don't know the context of everything. So I just thought I'd just do a quick video. It'll explain exactly what James White said. It'll explain my position. It'll explain briefly Christopher Myers' position and show you what James White has said about these things.
Now, Kurios there is representing the Tetragrammaton. And I'm going to wait till the next program to talk more about this. But there is a movement that's now starting to make inroads into the Reformed community. And ironically, it seems to be coming through the received text TR people that's actually telling people that Yahweh is not only how you should never pronounce the Tetragrammaton, it should be Jehovah, but that Yahweh is a foreign god, another name for Jupiter. This is linguistically on the same level as flat earthism. And I would not personally be surprised if some of these people pushing this are not flat earthers. I mean that. It is astonishing for me to be seeing these things. I saw a Presbyterian pastor. I tried to interact a little bit on Facebook promoting this stuff. It's like, yeah, this is what I was taught in seminary, but no, I understand that if you're going to believe in a preserved text, and it's just like, and I found out that Nick Sayers, the TR guy, is promoting the same thing, and I'm just like, oh, okay, all right. And just briefly, this person was actually saying, and then I looked and I discovered no manuscripts have the vowel pointing for Yahweh. All manuscripts have the vowel pointing for Jehovah. And I'm like, vowel pointing comes long after the days of Jesus, long after the days of the apostles. It's a Masoretic innovation. But these TR guys, some of these TR guys go, nope. Vowel pointings are inspired. And I'm just like, and so I'm posting pictures of the Dead Sea Scrolls. No vowel points. Doesn't matter. Because see, really, once you accept some of the presuppositional argumentation of the TR guys, you sort of, it's like, well, all right, I guess I'll believe that too. The point is that Yahweh did not have vowel points when it was written. When Jesus read from the scroll of Isaiah, that scroll had no vowel points. And so it's a 2-syllable word, not a 3-syllable word. Oh, and by the way, I know. Dr. Boyce directed me over to a video from Nick Sayers about this. And in a matter of minutes, I came up. And he said, James White, for example, denies that the Tetragrammaton has anything to do with the Hebrew verb form to be. And I'm like, where did I say this? I'm well aware that it is probably related to the verb form ayahe, probably in some fashion. I don't. And it's like, man, I live rent free. These guys can't make a video without making reference to me. And I'm like, I haven't thought about this guy in 4 months. And the only time I ever think about it is if someone mentions him to me. It's like, okay, whatever. So the point is, sorry to have been distracted there.
Okay, so just briefly, we'll go through what Christopher Myers has said to James White that made him think that he was a flat earther. So Christopher Myers, he put up this picture, vows of Jehovah. And he wrote, "Get it right. Don't call Jehovah the false god Yahweh, aka Yahweh. It is what the Samaritans called Jupiter." And so he had quite a lot of people comment on this, and he gave a correct evaluation of this, that it was the disciples of Gesenius who convinced Christian scholars that the vows of Jehovah were a corruption. The narratives say that the superstitious Jews put the vows for Adonai on YHVH. This is not only inaccurate, but strikes at the doctrine of providential preservation, since there are 0 manuscripts with the vows for Yahweh and thousands showing the true vows of Jehovah. And so obviously Christopher Myers, he's got his opinions of it, and they sound very similar to what the conclusions that I've come to. We do cross paths. There are quite a lot of these Reformed guys around, and on the Confessional Bibliology page, many times I'm talking to people, I forget who they are, but sometimes we've discussed these things at length and changed ideas. The concept for Jehovah, I got that from Scott Jones in 2001. Now, the concept of Yahweh being Jupiter, I got that from Stephen Avery. And so Stephen Avery, he wrote about that online. Lots of people were agreeing with that and posting about that. And so I looked into it, and eventually it made it into my book. And so that's what I was reading. The first chapter of my book, that's what the whole video was about. So then James White jumped onto this thread and he said, I really feel the need to comment here. When someone says that they have found 0 manuscripts with the vows for Yahweh, I am left wondering, does this person read Hebrew? And does this person have any idea how the Hebrew text was transmitted over time? Let's start with a sort of basic fact. Vowel pointing is not inspired. It was added centuries after the New Testament was completed. I am inserting a quick screenshot I took of the Isaiah scroll from the Dead Sea Scrolls. You will find 0 vowel points. There are editorial additions from a later period, so no one who has any knowledge of the transmission of the text would expect to find vowel points in the original manuscripts. This is Hebrew Basic 101. Secondly, as soon as I hear providential preservation being thrown in here, I really start to wonder what's going on. The Masoretes inserted the vowel pointing for Adonai, 3 syllables, as a reminder to the reader not to read the divine name Yahweh. This again is Basic Hebrew 101. The idea that this is somehow related to preservation coming centuries after the last apostle died is just odd and dangerous as well. What any of this has to do with foreign gods or any such theories, well, all I know is there is enough foolish stuff floating around the internet about the Hebrew scriptures to keep a number of small ministries funded anyway, which is rather sad. And so I'll just read what Christopher Myers says here, and just judge for yourself. Like, this is, I only looked at this today. I don't know that much about Christopher Myers. I know he's a scholarly guy, but let's look at exactly his credentials. Should he be called a flat earther, for starters? Okay, so let's look at this. He said, James, I've had the pleasure to learn to read Hebrew, both Paleo and Aramaic script, but only at a MDiv level. Nehemiah has the advantage in that he both reads and speaks it since he was a child. So he's probably talking about Nehemiah Gordon. So in my video, you'll see that I clearly say I didn't get these concepts from Nehemiah Gordon. I got these concepts from Scott Jones in 2001. In his 2001 article, probably about 2002, 2003, I got those concepts. And also the Yahweh concept from Stephen Avery. So anyway, but I digress. Let's continue. I read Latin/Greek better than I do Hebrew. Every Jewish scholar that I know does not agree with the secular consensus concerning the vowel points. Everyone that I have met believes that they have sufficient proof that the vowel points go back to Ezra. A minority say Moses, which was also the consensus of the Reformation Church. If you can read Latin, the following has not been translated yet. I recommend that you read Buxtorf's, in brackets, Father and Son, which were the best Hebraists of the Reformation era, which proves the inspiration of the vowel points. If you cannot read Latin fluently, which I know James White can't, then I recommend Peter Whitefield's dissertation, Proving the Inspiration of the Vowel Points in Substance. You may also consult John Owen on it as well. So, John Owen's a person who James White should respect, but, he's probably in the flat earth camp now. When you access the Latin of Buxtorf's, you will find that they had evidence in their day of the official scribes of the Jewish church which had tablets that acted as a key of rules for what the vowel points were for the Hebrew Bible, and that the pointed exemplars were kept in the temple. The synagogue copies and other common use copies were never pointed because of the rules of scribal tradition, which would cause destruction of whole manuscripts for mistakes to vowels on the divine name, which is found copiously throughout the Hebrew Bible. Therefore, orators were taught to memorize the vowel pointings in weekly synagogue readings according to the rules of the official ecclesiastical scribes. So he's gone back to Reformation era Hebraists, and James White, I've seen people give him Latin documents before, relating to the Comma Johanneum and things like that, and he's just completely dismissed it as, why would you give me something old? I want something new. It has to be from the academy or something like that. If Jan Kranz wrote about this, you go, oh wow, that's amazing. But if someone in the Reformation era, half of the time these guys were speaking fluently. Like you look at someone like Tremellius. Tremellius was fluent he was a Jew. He was fluent in Hebrew. He did a Syriac Bible. He was best friends with Beza and Jenius, and these guys all worked together, and they created a Latin Bible. And so, this is the sort of stuff where James White just has no idea about this type of literature. So Christopher Myers said, James, in another post, he said, James, if you are sincerely interested in how this connects to foreign gods, the first time Yahweh appears is in recorded history in this 1599 edition of Catholic Archbishop Gilbert Genibarad's, I probably butchered his name, chronolography, page 77, known as the inventor of Yahweh. Jenny Brard bases this novel pronunciation spelled in Latin Yahweh on two arguments: the Yah in Hallelujah, the testimony of the 5th century church father Theodoret of Cyrus that the Samaritans pronounced the name Yahweh. Unknown to Genibrad, the Samaritans themselves insist that they never pronounced the name Jehovah, not even in the time of Moses. This is confirmed by Josephus, Antiquities 12.5.5, who quotes a Samaritan letter of Antiochus IV from around 168 BCE that they worship a god with no name. See Robert Wilkinson, Western Christians and the Hebrew name of God. And so then he has a link to a PDF. And then Christopher tags James, and he has a very good link there to the 1599 article that he was talking about, which has Yahweh there. And so James White responds by saying, Christopher Myers, sigh. I'm sorry, but this stuff is on the level of flat earthism. So I simply have no interest in wasting too much time on this, but please, your response is self-refuting. You use the phrase Reformation Church, however, there's just a little problem. They did not have the Dead Sea Scrolls. Now we do. We have pre-Christian Hebrew manuscripts, and they did not contain the vowel points. They were clearly inserted at a later point, whether by the Masoretes or some proto-Masorete tradition. Just recently, we digitally unwrapped the new Leviticus scroll. Same thing. I'll attach another image from the Isaiah scroll. Facts are facts, right before your eyes. But let me point out, if someone exalts the vowel points out of some misplaced dedication to some kind of tradition, you are left dealing with the fact that the pointing for Psalm 110:1 denies the deity of Christ, and that purposely, for by the time they were inserted, the Jews knew well the Christian use of this text. So what do you do now? I see Nick Sayers promotes this kind of silliness too. So there you go. I do not know why Reformed folks seem susceptible to this kind of theorizing, but there you go. It remains indefensible. And then he's got his picture of the Dead Sea Scrolls without the vowels. So Christopher Myers responds, James, when you read Joseph Buxtorf, you will see that he had extant synagogue scrolls and manuscripts just as old as the Dead Sea Scrolls, which also did not have physical pointing. But even back then, Jewish scholars have long taught us that the rules for the vowel system have always been with the official scribes of the church. This has been proven by the Siloam inscription, 700 BC, where the letter Het is used as a vowel in those instances where the basic rules of pointing leave ambiguity. I have attached a picture for you below if you can read Paleo. Look at lines 1, 5 and 6. The words HYH, become, BRKH, pool, MH, cubit, all have the final Het. This represents the vowel kumets, long A. Final Het was to some extent used for E/AE and O, but because the use as an O was ambiguous, the letter Vav was later used for O. This proves that the vowel system has always been in place. The letter Het was used as a mater lectionis for every word requiring a long vowel. The official scribes of the church had their rule books for the vowel system for the non-ambiguous instances to the Hebrew Bible. I'm surprised that you profess to be a scholar and you're not familiar with this. Even the Dead Sea Scrolls teaches that the vowel system was in place before their time through its continued use of the mater lectionis. Please read Zevet Matres Lectionis in Ancient Hebrew Epigraphs from Cambridge. So I probably butchered that name, but and R.J. Ferruli's work on the Dead Sea Scrolls that proves the vowel system is represented there and predates the scrolls themselves. Do not be confused that the Reformed Orthodox position requires the inspiration of the Tiberian system of pointing. This is a straw man. The Reformed Orthodox taught that at least the substance of the Tiberian system of pointing is inspired and faithfully represented our Masoretic text. Be humble and read more on this, Dr. White. And so then he offers the Siloam inscription, where he is schooling James White about the Paleo-Hebrew. So then Christopher Myers writes again, James R. White, nota bene, that when you read the Dead Sea Scrolls, they abound with plene vowels, that is, consonants used as vowels. When we compare these plene written vowels with the Masoretic text of vowels, we see that the plene vowels confirm the phonological rules of the Masoretic text. This is what drove F.I. Anderson and A.D. Forbes in their seminal work Spelling in the Hebrew Bible to conclude the following. It can be inferred that the traditional spelling of the Masoretic text came from the period during which the Hebrew Bible was taking final shape, that is between 600 and 300 BCE. Since, however, its spelling is notably more advanced than that of the latest pre-exilic inscriptions, in brackets, early decades of the 6th century, and noticeably more conservative than the earliest manuscripts, in brackets, 2nd century BCE. This interval may be narrowed to 550 to 350 BCE, or more particularly to the Persian period, page 319. In other words, Hebrewists, even today, are confirming what the Reformed Orthodox have always contended, namely the inspiration of the vowel points, if not the form of the points themselves. At least the substance of them going back to the days of the great scribe Ezra. The Hebrew language is unpronounceable without vowels, and therefore Jehovah presented them for us, that there is no ambiguity to his purely preserved divine word. And then he wrote again, when you are done reading these sources with which hitherto you have been unfamiliar, let me know. We can go and get a coffee and talk about them. Okay, so it's a bit of a lively thread there. There's a lot of information. And so you can tell that Christopher Myers knows his stuff. And he's saying to James White, have you read this? Have you read that? Have you read this in Latin? Can you read Latin? And so basically Christopher Myers has just totally schooled James White. James White doesn't know Hebrew. He might be able to teach the basics. He might be able to teach the alphabet. Might be able to point out what the vowels are and a few basic words here and there. But he can't read Hebrew. He's, someone like his friend Dr. Brown would probably appreciate a post like this and look through it. Even though I believe, Dr. Brown is just like James White, and he would just, go over the top of this and not even acknowledge what's said there, and he wouldn't be able to read the Latin anyway. And so Christopher Myers has basically proven his credentials in this and proven that many other people believe what he's saying about the vowel points. And so I just thought I'd point that out about Chris Myers. And so I would recommend everyone go to that thread, everyone read what he has to say about it. Some of these guys in the confessional bibliology group, some of these, Calvinists, some people are like, why do you hang around these Reform guys and these Calvinists? Because a lot of these guys know Reformation literature very well. And we, TR, there's many different people who are in the TR camp. And just like young earth creationism, there's many people who believe in young earth creationism. You might go to a Baptist church, you might go to your fundamentalist Baptist church, you might go to a Reformed Baptist church, you might be Pentecostal, you might be whatever, you name it. There's many people who believe young earth creationism. And so you don't just chuck all those people into a certain group, you know what I mean? And so many of us TR guys, half the time we wouldn't really usually get along on a lot of issues. We'd be at loggerheads, debating certain things. But on these issues, we're in agreement. And many times I read through what these guys have to say, and I'm like, oh, wow, you've come to that same conclusion, but just on a different route. And that's very interesting. And so, and I think that these type of concepts with the explosion of the internet, people like James White are just going to get bulldozed because his book is just being torn apart. There's just so much evidence against his book, the King James Only Controversy, and he can't just continually just slander us forever. You know, there's. I understand he has this fanboy following, but there are thinkers out there, and I believe that people who tune into the Dividing Line, they do so because they want intellectual discussion about Christianity, and I believe that that these people are. Every now and then they would just float into these chat rooms. They would watch a video like what I put up there, or they would run into these people at churches, and they'll go, hang on, these guys have logical arguments against James White's position. Why isn't James White just dealing with those things? Why is he throwing sand in the air and using flat earth terminology and things like that?
This is linguistically on the same level as flat earthism. And I would not personally be surprised if some of these people pushing this are not flat earthers. I mean that. It is astonishing for me to be seeing these things. I saw a Presbyterian pastor. I tried to interact a little bit on Facebook promoting this stuff. So yeah, this is what I was taught in seminary, but no, I understand that if you're going to believe in a preserved text, and it's just like, this person was actually saying, and then I looked and I discovered no manuscripts have the vowel pointing for Yahweh. All manuscripts have the vowel pointing for Jehovah. And I'm like, vowel pointing comes long after the days of Jesus, long after the days of the apostles. It's a Masoretic innovation. But these TR guys, some of these TR guys go, nope. Vowel pointings are inspired. And I'm just like, and so I'm posting pictures of the Dead Sea Scrolls. No vowel points. Doesn't matter. Because see, really, once you accept some of the presuppositional argumentation of the TR guys, you sort of, it's like, well, all right, I guess I'll believe that too. The point is that Yahweh did not have vowel points when it was written. When Jesus read from the scroll of Isaiah, that scroll had no vowel points. And I found out that Nick Sayers, the TR guy, is promoting the same thing. And I'm just like, oh, okay, all right.
And so some other things that James White said about me. So he said that, I live rent-free in his head. Basically sort of saying that he hasn't even thought about me for about 4 months, and then all of a sudden he watches a video and I'm talking about James White.
Oh, and by the way, I know. Dr. Boyce directed me over to a video from Nick Sayers about this. And in a matter of minutes, I came up. And he said, James White, for example, denies that the Tetragrammaton has anything to do with the Hebrew verb form to be. And I'm like, where did I say this? I'm well aware that it is probably related to the verb form ayahe, probably in some fashion. I don't. And it's like, man, I live rent free. These guys can't make a video without making reference to me. And I'm like, I haven't thought about this guy in 4 months. And the only time I ever think about it is if someone mentions it to me. It's like, okay, whatever. So the point is, sorry to have been distracted there.
Well, it was interesting because today I was listening to a debate by David Pullman. He was debating an atheist, and when I started listening to this, I thought, actually, maybe I should listen to some of the dividing lines. And I thought, hang on, James White hasn't really done anything on textual criticism for about a year. Now, I could be wrong with that. I might have even watched something like 6 months ago that was on textual criticism. But it just feels like about a year since I've really, I was listening to the dividing line quite frequently, and I wouldn't really miss a show because most of the time he would bring up TR issues and all the rest of it. And so I would follow that, but he just seems to be talking about, he's just become Ben Shapiro sort of thing, and just talking about obvious things that anyone would agree with. America's in trouble and we're becoming communists and all this sort of stuff. And then, talks about the Catholics, and then he would just, half the time, if he does talk about the TR, it's just, slandering people and saying we're Ruckmanites or we're like Mormons or whatever. And so you sort of get a bit tired of that. It's like there's not much substance in this, and you want to deal with substance. You want to learn things, or you want to debate with something of substance. And so just this morning I was thinking I haven't really listened properly to a Dividing Line show off my own free will, and just I'll listen to that for about a year. And that was just today. And then I found out that everyone was chatting about it on the internet and saying that he was talking about my video. So another thing that he does is, he talks about, he's living rent-free in my head, apparently. But I also mentioned Dan Wallace, I mentioned Bart Ehrman, and other haters of the truth, and other haters of the Bible also. I mean, I mentioned Bart Ehrman. It depends on the audience I'm talking to. I'll talk about Bart Ehrman. I mean, so does he. And so I view James White as like a Bart Ehrman type of guy, but he's just in the church, within the church world. Bart Ehrman's outside of that church world, but to me, they're both doing huge damage to Christianity and to the Bible, and so that's why I mention him. So one of the things is the video that I did is the first chapter of the book that I wrote in defense of Revelation 16:5 against James White's position. So it's a book exposing James White's flawed position. So of course I'm going to mention him. It's just silly. If he wrote a book about Bart Ehrman, it's like, why do you keep bringing up Bart Ehrman? Imagine Bart Ehrman saying, why do you keep bringing me up in your shows? It's like, well, actually, I wrote a book about you. It's like this book, the first chapter of the book, is the book that I tried to hand James White when he came to Australia. He came to Australia, to Brisbane. That's the main capital city just near us. I would frequently go there, street preach, and the guys who invited him there, I would go preaching with them. So I know them. I travel up there to preach, to go up there, street preach, do a whole bunch of stuff, and then travel home again. So I went and saw James White there. I handed him the book. So I read the first chapter of the book in that video, and he refused to take it and said he would never read it. He doesn't want to read it. And so I was like, okay. And then he got on his Dividing Line and just basically said I was desperate, and I was, I'm a desperate person, and it's really sad and all this sort of stuff. And it's like, okay, well, I just tried to give you my book because you're saying all this rubbish about me on the internet. So here's what I've got to say. And so then instead of reading my book, he does a Dividing Line show on tweets that I've done. And so anyway, half of you probably already know that story. But here he is on his video saying, I've got James White in my head and it's rent free. Well, I guess so is Bart Ehrman, so is Richard Dawkins, so is any of these other wolves in sheep's clothing. I mean, Benny Hinn, Crefera Dollar, Kenneth Copeland. I mention these guys a lot. They also live rent-free in my head, and they're just wolves in sheep's clothing like James White is. So anyway, so James White then turns around and says that he can't recall anywhere where he's ever said that, Jehovah is not related to be. And he's just shocked at this. And I clearly in my video show the tweet that has that. So he clearly said this on Twitter, and he emphatically denied this on Twitter, that Hover was related to Jehovah, and then he blocked me. And then he did a Dividing Line program on what I'd said. So I've got no comeback and all the rest of it, and I had to do videos just sort of mopping up all the slander and stuff he said about me back then. And so, but one of the things that's really strange is he said that we were like flat earthers linguistically, but then he just turned around and said, and I would not personally be surprised if some of these people pushing this are not flat earthers. Now, I run a group on Facebook exposing flat Earth. And so, I get on there, I talk about how the Earth is round. I get on there and debate with people about this issue. And I've invited lots of people to join that group who are, regular Christians who I know and who he would probably know. And why is he slanderously saying this? And see, the thing is, just look at, this is just a 5-minute section. Okay, so he's brought up, Christopher Myers and all that they had to say. But then he's brought me up and he said, I'm living rent-free in his head because he mentioned me. Well, of course. It's a book about you, James. It's Revelation 16:5 book. It's the first chapter. It's basically the whole book is exposing how silly the concepts in this book are about Revelation 16:5. And you also say that on Twitter that you don't think that Jehovah is related to Hover, and you clearly said this. And so you're just lying. You're just making stuff up. Look, and half the time I give you the benefit of the doubt and say, okay, maybe you forgot about this. But see, even then, you wouldn't get on there and say, oh, yeah, Nick Sayers corrected me on that. No, I did say in a tweet, blah, 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 and I'm really sorry. Because I've watched you for years now, James. And I've watched you slander people. I've watched you misrepresent people. I've watched you call people, names. Say basically that we're not saved. We're heretics. I mean, basically you say anyone who is reading, following and believing that the King James is the Word of God is a King James onlyist, which is a cult. And Jonestown and, Waco and other names get mentioned in that. Stephen Anderson or Ruckmanites, and you just throw us all in the same bag. So we're pretty used to that. But now it's flat Earth. We're flat earthers. It's just, it's just a cheap shot. And so that's the reason I've done this video, is to just show people that James White, he will stop at nothing just to slander you. So I would encourage you to read through what Christopher Myers has said. I'd encourage you to watch the video that I did about Jehovah and about Yahweh. And I'd encourage you to question James White about these things. How much does he know about Hebrew? Why doesn't he know what Christopher Myers is talking about on these Hebrew points? Why does he say it's like flat Earth? Does anyone hold James White accountable to what he says about other people?
Oh, and by the way, I know. Dr. Boyce directed me over to a video from Nick Sayers about.
All right. Well, I'm Stephen Boyce. Let me give you a little bit. Let me give a shout out to Nick real quick. I actually read his book he provided for me, and I think Nick did a tremendous job of the Nomina Sacra. Actually, that was probably one of the best and most thorough explanations I've seen from Old Testament to New Testament that I've ever read, and how scribes in the Hebrew and in the Greek would actually insert it. Now, I would disagree with your final approach to it, Nick, but I actually want to give you a shout out and said you did a great job on that. I appreciate the work you put into that. And I would encourage anybody to read Nick's work on the Nomina Sacra. Like I said, Nick, I think it's one of the best I've ever read. I appreciate the amount of time I know you put time into that to explain how it made it into the Hebrew manuscripts as well as the Greek. I would encourage anybody to read your work on that. I think you did a tremendous job.
Oh, and by the way, I know. Dr. Boyce directed me over to a video from Nick Sayers about this. And in a matter of minutes, I came up. This is linguistically on the same level as flat earthism. And I would not personally be surprised if some of these people pushing this are not flat earthers. I mean that.